And I just pray that the message that she has got to share with us this morning will transform us and speak to us this morning, help it to influence decisions that we make and just give her the right words to share to us today. Thank you for her. Amen.
Well, good morning, everybody. And welcome to our service, and especially welcome to those who are joining us now on live stream. It's a pleasure to have you, and if you're one of the people who will be catching up during the week, that's good as well. So, as we start our talk this morning, I want you just to close your eyes for a moment and use your imagination and just see in your mind a wildlife photographer. And look at how he works to get his photos. He's probably up very early in the morning, carrying very heavy equipment, camera zoom as long as your arm. He's got to get in position, often in a hide, and stay there as quiet as possible without moving, so that he doesn't attract the targets, the wildlife that he wants to get photos of. And he may be there, or she may be there, hours, often in discomfort, but just to get that right photo. Have you seen them? Suffering for a purpose, knowing what they want to achieve and what they expect the future outcome to be. And if you're like me, you've enjoyed a lot of wildlife photos over the years. Okay, now in case of the temptation to fall asleep, we might as well open our eyes again now. We're not on the same level when we go into 1 Peter. The suffering he is talking about is a lot worse. It comes into the general category of persecution. But maybe there's just a hint of an idea in our image already of how Peter is going to advise his readers to cope with the suffering he had. Because Peter, writing to believers, both small groups and individuals, who had been scattered across the different provinces of the area we now know as Turkey, knew they were struggling. They were struggling. The suffering somehow had taken them by surprise. Why? Well, they were facing persecution, discrimination. They were trying to live a life that would reflect their faith and trust in Jesus, in his death, his resurrection, and in their hope of a glorious future with him. And they were convinced that a lot of people around them weren't, and were not happy with these people coming along and talking about Jesus. What did this discrimination or persecution mean for them? Alienation, exclusion, shame, insults, other abuses. We don't have all the details. But Peter, who by the time he wrote his letters was a mature believer with an unshakable faith in the resurrection and future return of Jesus, after all, he'd seen Jesus several times after the resurrection, he'd spoken with him, heard him teach, eaten with him, and Peter wanted to encourage the believers in these different areas of Turkey to stand firm in their faith, even if they had faced suffering, even if they were facing suffering for doing so. Let's turn to our reading, which we have, I think, in the NIV. 1 Peter 4 and 12. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you. but rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. If you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or thief or any kind of criminal, or even as a meddler. However, if you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the family of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is hard for the righteous to be saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? So then, those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. Now just take a moment and think. Our first question, first slide, please. What is our reaction to suffering? Let's take a moment to think about that, because in one way or another, we know what suffering is, don't we? What's your reaction to suffering? Just take a moment to think, and if you'd like, a moment to maybe share a thought with the person next to you. Reaction to suffering. Maybe it's surprise. Why me? Oh, I don't have to do this again, do I? Frustration, maybe? Anger? Uncertainty? Worry about our family? Losing our contentment in God? Losing our focus on Him? And losing the joy of our life and walk with Him? Are those parts of our reaction to suffering? Where we get to the point where we're questioning Him more and praying less? So what's the first thing we see in our reading today? Don't be surprised. Well, obviously they had been, because otherwise He wouldn't have bothered to say, don't be surprised. Peter says that they, and we, should expect to experience suffering for their faith on some level. And they, and we, shouldn't be surprised. However, he does add that he is actually speaking of suffering that is undeserved, so not for crimes or for unchristian conduct. His examples: murder, theft, and meddling. Intrusive or unwarranted interference in somebody else's life and business. Undeserved suffering because they are followers of Christ. Followers of Christ, Christians, yes? A word we're very used to, used quite happily. The first few times it was used, it was more intended as an insult than anything else. Oh, it's those people who follow Christ. Ignore them. They'll go away. Except we haven't. Jesus, in the passage known as the Beatitudes, which we find in Matthew 5 and Luke 6, had already spoken about persecution. So what did he say? Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. And going on, blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of God, Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. Persecution was very much a reality in their lives. And even if we don't feel that we are being persecuted as Christians here and now, persecution is still a reality today. 1 in 7 Christians are persecuted worldwide. 1 in 7. And we have ways of looking at levels of persecution, and a very simple way of looking at it is smash and squeeze. Yeah? So what is smash? We have a nice bit of a definition for that. Smash describes incidents of violence or aggression and ranges from vandalism and desecration of Christian sites to threats and physical violence against Christians because of their faith. Many of these incidents are also known as hate crimes. That's smash. And then we have squeeze. Squeeze, from interference with freedoms of conscience, expression and association, to denial of access to justice and legal services. The rights of Christian parents to raise their children in conformity with their faith are infringed. Christian-owned businesses are sued or forced out of business because of discriminatory policies. Christian religious symbols are removed from the public domain. Christians are subjected to negative stereotyping in the media, and Christians are excluded from university campuses, Christian groups, and speakers. You might have heard of that. It's got smash or squeeze. How does the media react to a Christian in politics? They're going to ask them a couple of difficult questions, aren't they? What is your view on? What do you think of? Never mind that they are there for totally other things. They have their stance as a politician, the things that they believe in, that they want the country to adopt and do, and they're being asked about something quite different, something which most of the time would be accepted as their own personal life and choice to be a Christian. They want to know what they think of. You can probably name a few of them. So how does Peter suggest that believers deal with this problem? One that he has described as a painful or fiery trial, or a fiery ordeal, depending on which version of the Bible you have. Well, let's go on to our next slide, and he says, first word? Rejoice. Rejoice. Now, I don't know about you, but it is not a totally natural reaction to suffering for me. So we ought to rejoice. And then, don't be ashamed. They might have intended that name Christian as an insult. Don't be ashamed. Rejoice in it. And praise God that you bear that name. Because we carry his name with us as Christians. Why? Suffering because of their faith in Jesus is suffering with Jesus. He suffered, we suffer, it's all somehow bound up together in his name. So they should rejoice because of their hope that they will have a place in his kingdom when he comes. It's looking ahead to that perfect photo you're going to get, or that perfect end of your life when you are with Jesus in his glory. They should rejoice because of their hope that they will have a place in his kingdom when he comes. So can we. They should rejoice because his Spirit, the Spirit of God, lived in them. Same for us. And persecution, another difficult bit in this passage, is described as part of God's judgment. Judgment on the church as a company of people who profess to believe in him, because persecution shows up the ones who really believe and are prepared to stand firm, and those that don't or won't. Persecution then is described as a refining fire to test the genuineness of their faith in the way that a refining fire purifies precious metal. Because we are precious to God. He wants our faith to grow. He wants us to develop our walk with Him. And then again, moving on, faith to be infectious needs to be genuine. If you don't really believe it yourself, you're not going to share it with anybody. If you're not convinced of the value of what you believe in, the value of what Jesus has done for you, you're going to be the kind of person who nobody around them knows that they're Christian, and maybe they're even surprised to hear that you go to church. Faith to be infectious. We've been talking about infectious faith this year. You'll be hearing it a lot still. It needs to be genuine to be infectious. So Peter here wanted to encourage them and assure them that whatever happened, the grace of God was with them. He wanted to encourage them to persevere in their faith and to look ahead at vindication at Christ's return, to the glorious future aspect of salvation. And that's his message to us today. Difficult message? Peter is very, very clear on what he says. It happens. Don't be surprised. Rejoice. I think at this point, we'll say goodbye to the people who have joined us on live stream. It's been good to have you with us.